This isn't about one creepy thing that happened. I didn't physically see an apparition. But promise me that you'll pretend to be in my shoes in each situation. I'm not telling this story to impress anyone. Rather, I just need to get these experiences off my chest. It's happened for years, ever since I can remember. The first thing I remember was me watching TV in the living room, probably in elementary school, and I had just finished my bowl of chips. I placed it in the sink and went back to sit on the couch, and it was completely silent. I then heard the bowl tapping against my metal sink, like it was unbalanced, so I went to adjust it. When I got to the kitchen, it stopped, so I went to sit back down, but the noise started again. I shrugged it off and told my mom about it, but she said it was a coincidence. Moving on. I'm in middle school now, and I've looked into the paranormal. I had to. I would hear footsteps on the stairs at night, but I chose to believe it was the house settling. It always had a creepy feeling of being watched, and I would hear random knocks or bangs. I'm doing my homework in my bed with the door closed. All of a sudden, the doorknob viciously began shaking, as if somebody was trying to open a locked door. But it wasn't locked. I jumped out of bed when it stopped and ran to my brother's room, which is right next door to mine, and swung his door open. I accused him of shaking my handle, but he was extremely confused and asked, "Why would I do something so stupid when I'm doing my homework?" Still freaked out, I just went to finish my homework, but I was distracted, glancing at the doorknob every so often. Some short points that didn't happen to me. My parents' closet is always closed, but one morning my dad found a small puddle of blood on a pair of new shoes that he never wears. But neither of them found cuts on themselves. My brother just saw the first Paranormal Activity movie, but my mom didn't because she hates that stuff. But a couple of nights later, she walks into his room and stands by his bed just staring at him. He freaks out and tells her to leave, but she stays there for 5 minutes and then walks back to her room. The next morning, she had no recollection. I know how fake this sounds, but trust me, I only wish I was making it up. After that, my mom was home alone and decided to take a shower. In the middle of her shower, the bathroom door flies open and hits the wall. She throws a robe on and runs out, thinking, of course, that there was an intruder, but nobody was found. I'm now a teenager, watching YouTube in my bedroom, when I hear a loud bang outside my door. I think my brother fell in the bathroom, which is next to his room, so I ran out into the hallway to laugh at him, but he's in his room, so I asked if he just fell, to which he replied no. Instead, he said, "I thought you fell." We search around for something that has fallen, but to no avail. A couple months later in December, we're going into our attic to get the Christmas decorations. Our attic has all of our boxes lined up along the perimeter. When we peeked up there was a box on its side, right in the middle. I think it's important to note that our attic is right above the bathroom. Nothing crazy has happened after that, except for me and my friend hearing a car start in our garage, but no car was running. We just thought we were crazy. But one day after school of senior year, I'm home alone and my boyfriend lives 10 houses down the street. So, I planned on walking there soon. I'm sitting on my living room floor with our family dog and cat. I then hear the loudest, most distinct noise I've ever heard. Imagine having a 2-story house with a very tall living room and dining room ceiling. I heard someone stomping and running in my room. I'm telling you, I heard it. My cat runs away, my dog jumps up defensive. I ran outside to look on my roof, but nobody was there. I ran around the whole house looking up there, but there was just the roof. I ran back in the house, grabbed my phone and my keys, and then ran to my car. I cried to my boyfriend and his family about it for an hour, but I still don't know if they believe me. At this point, I'm 19 years old, and my parents have divorced. I'm living with my mom in a small apartment with a tiny washer and dryer. My dad left for town on a business trip, so I asked if I could wash my clothes at his house, and he agreed. I'm terrified of being there alone, so I brought my boyfriend and his older friend Devonte. Devonte is 24. I told them the things that have happened, and Devonte says it's all in my head. I laughed and I said, I hope something paranormal happens to you tonight so you'll believe me. The dryer says it'll take 74 minutes, so my boyfriend and I go to play a board game, and since it's 10 p.m., Devonte wants to take a nap. I told him he can go up to my brother's old room since my brother is moved out and nobody uses it, so he does. 10 minutes later we hear a bang, and we thought he dropped his phone between the bed and the wall. The bed is pressed against the wall connected to the hallway, so it makes sense that it would be so loud. About 10 more minutes go by, and we hear Devonte saying something upstairs, but we figured he was talking on the phone. Then he gets louder. My boyfriend and I look at each other confused. Devonte yells, Holly, come get your man. Now, more confused, I tell my boyfriend Anthony to run up there and see what's wrong. When he gets to the room, Devonte asks, Wait, what? He's staring at him, wide-eyed. Devonte says, No, did you just run up those stairs? Devonte got up and exited the room and ran down to where I was waiting. He said, Tell me you didn't just run up there when I called you. Anthony and I were super confused, and Devonte began freaking out and pacing. He said he heard somebody whispering, Get out, get out, get out. And it slowly got louder until they were yelling at him to get out. He thought my boyfriend was just messing with him. That's why we heard Devonte talking. He was saying things like, Anthony, F off. And Anthony, stop it, I'm trying to sleep. Devonte was so freaked out that we left that night, not finishing the laundry. We had to pick it up the next day. I laugh at this because it's such a stereotypical thing to have a ghost say get out in movies and on YouTube videos. But I've never seen him teary-eyed and so genuinely terrified as he was that night. That's the end of it all, I think. My boyfriend and I and my mom moved halfway across the country for other reasons. I think all of my paranormal struggles are over. Well, maybe. In our new house, a bang was heard in the sunroom, which freaked both of our dogs out. The puppy wouldn't even re-enter the room. Just tonight, we got Chipotle and ate in our bedroom. And that's when I heard the foil with the tortillas in it being dragged on my nightstand table. Yes, the fans were going, but not strong enough to pull the heavy tortilla and foil with it. I'm spooked out and decided to write down all of my experiences to make myself feel better. Again, it's not a one-time story, and it's probably not as entertaining as other ghostly things that you'll read here. But I needed this off my chest. If any of you have experienced these things, please let me know. It would make me feel so much better to know that I'm not alone. I grew up in several haunted houses. Even now, we have an entity in our kitchen who we jokingly call the fridge ghost, as it likes to hang out by the fridge and occasionally open it in the middle of the night. But for now, I'm going to talk about a house I lived in until middle school. It's located on a street called Cherry, which my friends and I always joked about for obvious reasons. However, nothing about the feeling I had when I lived in that house with my family was anything to joke about. My friends never wanted to spend the night at the house I grew up in. All of them had the same bad feeling staying there. This sinking feeling that formed in the pit of their stomachs before something would happen. And unusual things inevitably would, more often than not. Doors would regularly open and close on their own, and this was something that I chalked up to the tilt in the foundation, at least at first. But when you hear your doors, cabinets, doors leading to the house, essentially anything with a hinge, slam in the middle of the night, you start to question if it's just regular house noises. The windows would open and shut on their own as well, which is a little harder to pin on a shifting foundation. There were a couple of times that the televisions would turn on and off on their own. Sometimes the volume on the TV sets would go up and down as well. And there were other times the channels would show up on the television sets that I've never seen. I could probably blame the odd television behavior on magnetism, or the fact that both television sets were quite old. However, the strange things I would see on those off channels through the static are enough to convince me that there might have been something else going on there. I would often hear noises in the vents, like things were crawling around in them. Sometimes it sounded like bodies were being dragged through the ventilation shafts. Sometimes I would hear scratching on the walls or the windows, or other out-of-the-ordinary sounds like footsteps on the floor when no one else was there. My mom used to tell me that it was little woodland creatures who got into the insides of the walls, but I never saw these animals. The closest I came to seeing anything close to that was one family of skunks we found living under our porch. But after moving them out safely to the woods, we never saw any other animals that could account for making the types of noises I was hearing. Sometimes I heard whispering, and other times I heard yelling, like a faint cry through the walls. There were other times I would find weird yellow liquid on the walls or other similar substances. My mom used to tell me it was mold and not to touch it until she could clean it. But it didn't look like any mold I've ever seen. It didn't look like any of those substances could be made by anything living. I would also see ghostly figures wandering through the house. When I was young, I used to talk in great detail with what I think was a child female entity. It was more like a one-way conversation with the entity, although sometimes it would answer in its own way. I wrote an essay about my friendship with that ghost for one of my classes later on, and submitted it as fiction, so the teacher wouldn't think I was crazy. But the truth is that my friendship with that ghost and some of the other presences was very real. Of course, there was the typical haunting stuff too. Objects being thrown, pulled, or just simply going missing altogether. I used to joke with my mom that the wall trolls or house gnomes had made off with our stuff, to which she would just roll her eyes. When my mom started seeing some strange entities peering at us through the windows, or as we were sleeping, she started to take my stories a little more seriously. She won't agree with everything I've claimed to see in that house, but she will definitely admit that there were presences that would appear. I often saw toys coming to life, including a doll my aunt had brought me back from Russia. I had a dream that the doll was trying to kill me by choking me to death. When I woke up, the doll was sleeping next to me in my bed. No one had ever moved it there that night. I ended up blessing the doll and throwing it away. To this day I don't like dolls, and I won't sleep in the same room with one. I remember that the landlord who lived in the house next door was always asking us how things were going there. My mom told me to keep quiet about the things we saw because the rent was cheap and she didn't want to upset her. But even though I never got any direct answers from the landlord, I could see by her behavior that she must have known something was off with the house. Perhaps the strangest thing was that the house didn't particularly have a dark past or a history attached that would make it stand out as a hub for spiritual activity. The landlord was cranky, and her attitude could have contributed to the overall negative energy. But other than that, we never knew what in particular made the house so haunted. I didn't exclusively see evil entities in the house either. Like I said, I made some friendships with the ghosts. And I even saw other entities, what I can only describe to be little people and entities that looked like what people say greys are, but they weren't aliens. This leads me to believe that the house was built on top of some kind of ley line or portal that opened up into other realms. Maybe instead of a haunted house, we just had a house with the gateway. I'm not sorry that I had the experiences that I did. In fact, I think it broadened my horizons and showed me from an early age that there's more to the world than what we can physically see. I will always think of the friendships I formed with the spirits and other entities fondly. For some people, my experience might have a rational explanation, and that's fine. I've always had an open mind, and I'm happy to listen to many sides of an argument. But for me, the experiences I had in this house growing up were tangible, and not just the imagination of an elementary school kid. They are something that has colored my view of this beautiful and mysterious world, and has opened my eyes to all kinds of realms of possibility. So, a few months back, I moved into this beautiful two-story house with my mother, and we had a roommate with two kids in a great neighborhood. The price was suspiciously cheap, but at the time, we didn't think twice about the price. Anyway, the first night was a little creepy. I thought I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. My mom was close to the stairs on the second floor, so I always heard who comes up and down, but I just dismissed it, thinking it was just the house settling, as they say. Plus, I thought to myself, people always get a creepy vibe the first night they move into a new place, right? So, after a few tosses and turns, I eventually fell asleep. Now, this was the first night, and the next encounter didn't happen for a few weeks. But this definitely got everyone in the house spooked. That night after work, I came home, happy that I had the next day off. So as soon as I got home, I got ready to play a game. As I sat down, I felt this presence in the room. But it was only me, and it literally felt like something evil was looking directly at me. I felt drained, but at the time I didn't think much of it. Looking back on it now, it was almost like something was stealing my energy or feeding off of it. But as normal, I dismissed it and went to go ask my roommate if she wanted to smoke, and she said yes. So we went outside and we were talking for a good bit. But out of nowhere, she brought up how she felt about the house. Then she told me what happened to her earlier that day. She told me that when she came outside to smoke, as she was sitting on the stairs, which is where we always smoked, she happened to turn, and she saw the blinds from our living room open. She saw a figure looking directly at her, but when she turned to get a better look, it vanished. She said she didn't go back into the house for a few hours, but when she did, nothing was there. To me, it seemed like nothing. I honestly thought she was just seeing things. But we both felt like there was always something watching us. This is when things get a little scary. About a week or two passed, and my roommate and I were down in the basement smoking because it was snowing outside. We finished up, and then her two kids wanted to play, so we both stayed downstairs and watched the kids play. We were sitting a good bit away from the stairs when we saw her youngest son look up the stairs. The creepy thing is the way he turned and made it look like somebody had called him. Mind you, we were both looking at him at this time, so when he turns, he then slowly looks up the stairs, as if he was trying to make out what he was looking at. As soon as his head stops, I'm assuming that's when he saw whatever it was he saw, and he started crying, like literally bawling. When his mother called his name, he just smiled and ran towards her. From our point of view, we couldn't see up the stairs because there was a wall covering it. But we know he saw something. That's when we knew the house was probably haunted. Since she was home more than I was, and more than my mother was, she had stories about doors being opened that were originally closed. You know, the normal haunting stories. But now we started to believe her even more. My mother said she started to feel depressed whenever she got home. This was the scariest thing that happened to me personally. We were moving, and at first everything was going smoothly. I was packing up the living room, and my mother was packing up her room. The roommate had already moved out, so it was just the two of us. After a few minutes of moving, I heard a loud bang. It was as if a bowling ball had fallen off of a countertop. It came from upstairs. So I went to go check it out. Nothing fell. Nothing was on the ground anywhere. My mom and I were pretty spooked, so we left to get some extra boxes and then we came back. When we got back, it was nighttime, and I went upstairs to pack up the kitchen. As I was doing so, I heard this loud, demonic screeching sound. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's true. At the time, I didn't think much of it. In my head, I knew it came from in the area I was in. But when you're in a situation like that, sometimes defenses take over and you just try to brush it off. So I brushed it off. Thought it was just a car from outside that had a bad brake and had to brake hard. Anything other than what I'd actually heard. I proceeded to pack the kitchen. When I opened the cabinet, I heard the loud bang again. So I looked around, and then I looked back into the cabinet, proceeding to close it and run downstairs. Literally nothing had fallen in that room. I was running downstairs when I heard the screech again. But this time, it came from inside the cabinet. I was still close enough to tell. It was almost like I felt a gust of wind blow past my head at that point. And I swear it felt like something went through my forehead. It felt like a punch. It wasn't like a fist punch, but like an energetic punch. It didn't hurt, it was more like a force that went through my body, that I could physically feel. I booked it downstairs and told my mom what happened. Needless to say, we moved a lot faster than expected. If anyone has any experience with this stuff, please tell me what really happened to us. I always find it kind of odd, ghosts and demons and stuff like that. But maybe they are real. Something clearly was going on at that house. I just wish I knew what it was. A few weeks ago, I was talking to my mom. It was a Monday night, and she looked pretty tired, so I asked her what was up. She told me that the night before, at about 5 in the morning, she was woken by the sensation of being watched. She had her back to the wall, but she felt as though someone was behind her, laying in the bed with her. She felt a cold chill and was paralyzed with fear. After a few minutes, she finally convinced herself to look. Of course, there was nothing there, but it took her quite a while to fall back asleep. The funny thing is, at the same time in my room in the basement, which is nowhere near her, so her moving would not have woken me up, I was awoken by a sound, so I sat up to look, and there was a man standing at the end of my bed. Of course, it scared me so much, within a second I flung my covers off to sit up, but he was gone. There's a chair at the end of my bed, with no space to stand, and he couldn't have been that tall while sitting. We were both spooked. Today, I was sitting alone in my basement working on homework, and someone ran their fingers through my hair. I'm pretty sure our house is haunted. For a little backstory, I have never experienced sleep paralysis before in my life. This is my first experience ever with it. I have 3 little girls, 4 years old, 2 years old, and 4 months old. Yesterday afternoon, I had been having battery and cold air intake issues with my car, and I needed to work on it in order to be able to get into work on Monday morning. Therefore, my retired grandmother kept the girls overnight to assist me in getting everything that I needed to get done for work. Let's start with Saturday. Have you ever heard of the creepy fact that if you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason at all, it means that somebody was staring at or watching you? This is because it was instinctively bred into us as a protective instinct. Our senses are heightened in this moment to protect us from a possible threat that had been eyeing us down while we're asleep. Well, this happened to me Saturday at 3 a.m. As I awoke, I heard an eerie whistling in my ear. I quickly checked my surroundings, bobbing and weaving my eyes through every crevice that whoever or whatever was watching me could be hiding. I found nothing and heard nothing else, and I was able to doze back off fairly quickly. Sunday night came along. Last night, I had trouble falling asleep, a lot more than usual, and I wasn't stressed or anything like that. My sleep schedule hasn't changed more than an hour, more or less, and I'm used to getting about 6.5 to 7 hours of sleep at night. so absolutely nothing was different. I had been tossing and turning from midnight to 1:30 in the morning, going in and out of catnap mode. I couldn't seem to get my brain to have a reasonable reboot. Once I had become comfortable for the last time, I hadn't even noticed that I had finally shut down for a sleep restoration. The first thing I remember is my grandmother's house. It had a dark blue tint that blanketed the whole house. Every room, wall, everything was hued in blue. I remember walking through and checking in each room. I guess I was unintentionally checking on my girls that were sleeping over at my grandmother's house. I felt like I was astral projecting. I knew that I was consciously awake and walking around her house. I knew each room that I was walking into. Whatever my subconscious was worried about, everything was fine. My grandparents and baby girls were all sound asleep, peaceful. I watched them for a couple of minutes, checking their breathing, and then I started to walk home. In a matter of seconds, I was walking through my door, my husband still asleep on the couch. But something didn't feel right. The ominous blue light was still blanketing every room, every corner. Imagine putting a blue light bulb in every fixture and then turning them all on. It was like that. I sat at my dining room table to meditate and clear my head before returning my body back to the couch. I needed my conscience to stop wandering and rest. As I sat there, I heard a voice that had multiple tones working together in harmony to create the most demonic and ominous voice I've ever heard. I felt my mind, my body, and my voice lose control. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I couldn't think for myself. He took control. The voices got louder. A female voice and a deep male voice harmonized to create a legion-like sound. They kept repeating, "You are everything. You are everything," until I began to say it in harmony with them. I had no control. My mind didn't want to repeat it, but I had no choice. I felt like I was being possessed. Anyone could take over what felt like an empty shell I used to call my body at this point. What they were saying changed. The woman's voice disappeared, and it was just the deep and demonic male voice I heard now. He said, "I am everything. I am everything," repeating and repeating. At this point, I felt my body and mind fighting back. I was fully conscious and awake now, fighting as hard as I could to keep my shell of a body contained by its rightful owner. I was screaming my husband's name, but I knew he couldn't hear me. Not yet. I had to keep screaming to wake my body up. I felt my brain's confusion. It was fighting me, while I was fighting my demon. We weren't working together, and I could sense it all. I started to communicate, trying to move my body. I knew I couldn't. I knew that I was caught. My ribs, my hips, my thighs were glued where I lie on my left side, unmovable. I could only move my head. My screams for my husband became muffled, which is much more than I could say just moments before. I turned my head and looked behind me. I needed to be released. I had to be let go. As I whipped my head to my rear, a tall and skinny shadow towered over me, enjoying my struggle, gluing me where I lie. Large, skinny hands, with slender, rigid fingers, pushed me deeper into my couch, held my body in a trance. There were no features, just a black and haunting silhouette that had been forcing me to say everything I had earlier. He was the one. I was finally able to communicate to my brain to move. Anything, just move. Still a fight that I had to put up, but at least I knew I was finally winning. Finally, my screams were no longer muffled. My husband finally heard me, as a relief had washed over me, and it was gone. I was able to sit up, patting myself with shaking hands to make myself aware that I was back. I was me again, and I finally had control once more. I went out and had a cigarette to calm my nerves. I felt the smoke hit me, and the nicotine soothed my mind, but I still felt and knew the pain. the struggle, and the torture that I had gone through, and I wonder if it will happen again. I don't know who these voices were. I don't know what the demon was that calls himself everything. Will he come back for me again, even when I fought back so hard and won? I can't find the answers that I need, but I know this wasn't just a nightmare or some freak accident. There was a reason this happened to me, and I need to know what it was. My story is from when I was growing up at my parents' house in Burton, Michigan. Since I was about 7 or 8, all the way up until I moved out, I witnessed several odd occurrences. My dad was an over-the-road truck driver, so I was home with my mom most of the time. Weird things that have happened include tapping on the walls, voices, being touched, feeling like you're being watched, and even a full-on person that disappeared in front of me. There have been several instances where I, and my friends who I have never told this to, have heard chunks of conversation coming from other rooms or downstairs. When I went to investigate, it would immediately stop. I was home alone. The TV was off and the windows were closed. There have been a few other events, such as tapping on walls, doors shutting, and very clear footsteps walking along the hardwood floors. Once they even went past me so close that I could feel it in the floorboards. The creepiest thing was one day a friend and I were down in the basement, which consisted of a large family room, a laundry room, and my dad's workout room. The door to the workout room did not have a doorknob since they were refinishing the house. There was only a hole in the door for one. I don't remember why, but my friend and I looked through the hole and clearly saw a man sitting on a weight bench. She thought it was my dad. We didn't think anything of it until shortly after at dinner, when I asked my dad why he wasn't at the table. I then learned that he was a few states away out on the road still. I had thought he came home. I told my mom and she immediately called the police thinking that there should have been someone in the house. She said she heard commotion in that room earlier in the day, but she thought it was us. There was no sign of anyone being in there. Another creepy thing happened in the basement. Some friends and I were in the family room playing Nintendo 64, and clear as day, a man walked right past the double sliding laundry room doors. The room is like 30 by 8 and has a set of the bifold closet doors as an entrance. Almost all of my friends saw this. The man walked past, and right before he was out of sight, turned toward the wall and made a motion like he was opening a refrigerator door and putting something in. He then walked out of sight. We went in there to see who the hell it was, and there was nobody there. I've been living on the other side of the state for 3 years, but my mom still lives there and is most of the time alone with the dog since my dad is still on the road a lot. She says that she still hears the conversations and the footsteps quite often, and has seen the guy in the basement twice. I'm skeptical, but honestly I don't know what to make of it. There have been multiple witnesses, and I've tried to debunk everything, but I just don't know how to explain it. At 16, I was responsible for getting my 7-year-old sister on the bus for school. I always had to get her dressed, feed her, and tie her hair up in a ponytail. One morning I was sick, but I got her up as usual and got her off to school. I was super nauseated and laid on the couch with a trash can next to me. The TV was playing some cartoon on Disney, and I had my arm covering my eyes as I laid there. I was dozing off as I heard my sister come into the living room and say, "Sissy, will you tie my hair up?" Not really thinking about it, my eyes still covered, I held out my hand, waiting for her to place her hair tie in my palm. Whatever this thing actually was must have realized that it couldn't give me what I was asking for, and right around that time, I realized that I had already gotten my sister up and on the bus that morning, so whatever was standing next to me wasn't my sister at all. As I sat up, spooked as hell, the thing ran off. I could hear its footsteps running through the kitchen and down the hallway. I didn't see anything, No apparition. Just sounds. I walked to my grandmother's house about a block away, and shortly after that I moved in with her because my mother and I couldn't get along. Weird things like that happened all the time on that property. What I didn't expect was for it to follow me to my grandmother's. 2 weeks after moving in, I was in the room with the door cracked. I was home alone, and it was late. My brother, who was 15 at the time, was always at the neighbor's house and would stop in to shower, eat, and sleep. I heard him come in, go into his room, and fiddle around. I could hear him talking, like he was on the phone with someone. I called for him, and he didn't respond, so I assumed he was just pranking me. I got up and left my room, and his bedroom door, across the hall, was closed and locked. I stuck my thumbnail into the keyhole and popped it open, planning to scare him. When I opened the door, his lights were off. His room was dark, and it was empty. I flipped the light on and started investigating. I opened the closet, looked under his desk, and assumed that he'd gone out the window and was going to come back in and scare me or something. When I checked the window, it was bolted down, something my grandmother had done to keep him from sneaking out. I was perplexed, and then spooked. I left his room to go check the rest of the house, and as I was walking down the hallway and into the living room, I heard someone running hard behind me. As I turned around, this nothing of a presence ran right through me and took my breath away. I fell to the floor, feeling like I'd just gotten socked in the gut. When I came to, I ran next door to find my brother passed out on the couch with his friends. It was an absolutely terrifying experience, and one that I will always remember. I don't know what that thing was, but it mimicked my siblings perfectly. Their voices, their footsteps, their actions, everything. About 10 years ago, my mom, 2 sisters, and I, and another small family that we were friends with, took a short trip to Northumberland. It's not too far from Alnwick Castle, where the first and second Harry Potter films were shot. My dad and the father of the other family had to work, so it was just our 2 moms and us 7 children, aged between 5 and 15 years old. Because the other family was quite wealthy and we were not, they paid for the accommodation, which turned out to be an old country house built in the late 1700s, Newton Hall. It has since been stylishly refurbished into a wedding venue, but was then an eerie and isolated shadow of its 19th century preoccupants. I remember us all being shuffled through dark wood-paneled passages into a large staircase lined with old portraits. We joked about it being like Hogwarts, the portraits as grim inhabitants with their eyes alive and moving, following us as we climbed the stairs. What was first a joke soon became a genuine concern in the following couple of days. As a side note, I'm still amazed at how we had the whole place to ourselves. Me being young then and not fully appreciating what the cost must have been to rent it out. My mom still claims it was because there were no more holiday rentals available in the area during summer, implying that this grand hall was a sort of last resort, but I don't think so. Anyway, in addition to the creepy paintings, there was a huge Native American-style totem pole, with its garish peeling paint and beady eyes glaring from multiple heads. This stood watch on the landing of the second floor. In a so-called playroom were various animal heads mounted on the walls, and in the tall corridors on the ground floor were benches, their legs fashioned from a brutal mesh of deer antlers. It was the benches that were the first cause for alarm. On the first morning, upon waking up, we noticed that 1 or 2 of these benches had moved a few inches from their proper placement at the wall's edge. However, this strange but subtle event was not given any thought, at least until the next morning when it happened again. I remember distinctly that the blame was put to the eldest of the 7 children, Michael, who had a sort of mischievous manner about him, but he denied it. This physical disturbance in the already extremely scary house was enough to make us sleep in pairs. I remember that my older sister and I were taking turns sleeping on the side of the bed that faced the wall, rather than be exposed to anything that might come in the night. Only one other thing happened that seemed poignant enough for me to remember now. 3 of the girls developed some kind of rash while we stayed at the hall. The doctor diagnosed it as impetigo, an infectious skin rash, which explains the coincidence. However, the cause still remains completely ambiguous and was never discovered. I don't know if it was a natural infection or something more sinister. Either way, the home was the scene of one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced, before or since, and I genuinely hope to not experience anything like that again. In Thessaloniki, Greece, several people consider a certain house to be very haunted. The house was said to have been the mansion of its previous owner, and today it has not been inhabited since it's dilapidated and the surrounding area has been transformed into a warehouse for building materials. It's rumored that those who have stayed there at night have heard terrible noises from ghosts roaming in the rooms, making them flee in terror. It is also said that the previous owner's building is accompanied by a curse that he put on it, and that anyone who lives there is in danger of going mad, and anyone who tries to demolish it is in danger of dying. In the past, 2 contractors decided to demolish it, but on the day of the planned demolition, they suddenly died. One died from a heart attack, and the other was killed in a traffic accident in Athens. I don't have any personal experience with this house, but I don't think I want any. I grew up in southern Idaho, and I moved to Eugene, Oregon around age 20. We moved into our newly built home in the countryside at the start of the millennium, literally months after my grandma on my mom's side, who I call Nana. I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and I lived there until I was 17 when my dad kicked me out of the house. After that, I went and lived with my grandparents about 5 miles away, whose house was also haunted. They too had built their own home. To put things into perspective for some things that happened, our house was set 5 miles from any town in the middle of fields, with only a few houses about a half-mile away. One of those houses was my cousin's. My uncle had built his family's house there, and my dad was really close to him, part of why we built there. It too had some weird things that happened that my cousins and I experienced. The first thing that was odd happened when we were moving our stuff from my dad's parents, the grandparents that I later lived with, into our new home. We lived in their basement, but it was a 1-story house. I'm obsessed with Star Wars and had little ships that I played with as a kid. My favorite one was a TIE fighter. I was playing with it one day while the movers and my parents packed and moved things. At one point, I set it on a chair in my parents' room while I was alone downstairs. I ran out of the room, turned the corner, ran up the stairs, realized that I had left it on the chair, and immediately ran back. When I got there, it was gone. I'd only been gone about 10 seconds, if that, and no one had gone by me at any point. It was a small, narrow basement, so I would have had to have passed anybody who went to move it. I looked everywhere, and even emptied the entire room, but I never found it. The setting of our house was a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath with an unfinished basement. My room sat directly above the garage, my parents' room above the living room, and the house was surrounded by 1.5 acres of lawn and about 3 acres of woods on one side, with fields on the other. My cousin's house sat between the fields and the forest, with a path leading between our houses. Growing up in our new home, we had some weird things happen every now and then that we all experienced at one point or another. Lights would turn on by themselves. We had security cameras and caught that several times. All of us would often hear the garage door open, a car drive in, and the garage door close. Then we would hear the door to the house open and close, often when somebody was gone. Sometimes only one of us would hear that. Other times, two of us in different rooms would hear it. My parents were very rarely home, so it was always pretty much impossible that somebody was in the garage. I like to joke that I was an only child raised by 5 cats. My dad would often hear loud music with a strong bass line when home alone. He would come out of the room thinking it was me playing music, and sometimes the stereo would be playing music, and other times it wouldn't, but every time he was home alone. When I was around 12 or 13, I used to spend the night in our guest bedroom that we had set up as an exercise room for fun, and watch movies all night. That ended one night when I woke up sometime in the night to the TV turning off and on rapidly, even though it didn't have a remote. I immediately ran to my parents' bedroom and I barely slept that night. Later that year, I went to a summer camp at a martial arts studio with just a few friends. We played hide and seek, but got freaked out after 2 different TVs started rapidly turning on and off on their own, even while we held the remote to both of them, with the batteries taken out. Since our basement was unfinished, we stored things down there. My dad is a slight bit of a hoarder, and had kept a lot of his art from art school downstairs. I admittedly went through boxes downstairs often, still looking for that Star Wars ship for years, but I never did find it. One time my mom and I went to visit her dad in California. When we came back, my dad scolded me for taking all of his art out downstairs. I told him that I hadn't touched his art at all, and actually didn't know that he had art down there, which was true at the time, as it was really buried under a lot of stuff. He said he'd gone down one night to find a lot of his paintings, drawings, and even a sculpture laying on top of boxes around one of the unfinished rooms, as though somebody had been looking at them. Even creepier was that while one sculpture was laying on boxes, another, mind you these were heavy plaster sculptures, was smashed in 2 on the floor. The downstairs always had a weird vibe, and after that, if you stood at the top of the stairs, it felt like you were being watched from the bottom. We had a few weird things that would happen outside our house too. Since we had a massive lawn, we had a big sprinkler system that could run off the canal for the farms, or off of our well water. One summer, our pump was sabotaged at the standpipe by the canal. At the time we thought it was a farm's kids playing a prank, and we just switched over to well water. A few nights later though, we went outside for some reason, and we heard splashing water almost like a geyser coming from out of the dark. My dad went to investigate and found the test tap for our well full open, which was hard to do. We got it shut off, but for some reason our well pump seemed to be still running, so we needed to shut it off via a valve box in the ground. When we opened it, it was completely filled with dirt, and we had to dig it out. We asked around, but never figured out what happened. My cousin's house, like I said, was about a half a mile away, and I would often play with them. They said that they would hear screaming from their basement on occasion, and often heard footsteps coming up from the basement when no one was down there. On a couple of occasions, I would be at their house and see what looked exactly like a red laser pointer on the wall, as though someone far away was pointing it through the window. But then it would go up the stairs, which was far above the window. Later, they moved out of the state, and it sat empty for a number of years. I would still wander around their house on occasion, and several times I saw this laser pointer. Mind you, like I said, we are out in the middle of fields and forest, with the next closest house at least a mile away. At night, lights in their house would be on randomly, and then off the next day or night. Growing up, we'd often visit my grandpa in Eugene, Oregon. He'd built his house as well, but it was a massive house that looked and smelled old. We'd stay on the second story in the bedrooms my mom, her sister, and brothers used to live in. I stayed in a small bedroom that had a walk-in closet with its own locking door. Weird too, because it was locked on the bedroom side, and even had a latch for a padlock in addition. On occasion, I would wake up to find the door open and then go back to sleep, and then it would be closed in the morning. Often I had nightmares in that room and would run to sleep in my parents' room. That stopped though, because I would then have very vivid night terrors about their closet and wake up screaming. After that, I just put up with the weird walk-in closet in the other bedroom. I'm pretty sure my grandpa's house was haunted because my grandma was an avid antique collector for the entire time she was alive. A lot of stuff gave off weird vibes. My dad says that he often felt a cat jump into the bed, even after the cat died in that house. Lots of people have heard footsteps and felt cold spots throughout the house, and sometimes you can hear whispering somewhere in the house but never pinpoint where. The weirdest thing that ever happened to me though was right before my dad kicked me out of the house. Keep in mind, I get really dehydrated super easily, and I can easily drink at least a gallon of water a day. It's always been that way too. I don't know why. One night I had a dream that was actually very pleasant. At one point though, I became extremely thirsty in the dream. I kept looking for something to drink, but I couldn't find anything. Then this really kind, beautiful lady showed up and offered me some Skittles. I know that sounds really dumb, but I really liked Skittles at the time. I started eating them, thinking that it somehow might quench my thirst. But I was still just so thirsty. Seeing this, the lady seemed concerned, so she kept giving me Skittles, and I would take them and eat them, while just standing there smiling. She would give me more. This went on for a bit, but then I realized my hand was hitting something in real life, which started to wake me up. I woke up with my hand hitting the wall because it was reaching off to the side of the bed for the Skittles and hitting the wall instead. When I realized this, I looked up involuntarily, and standing there smiling down at me, with a white glow, was the same lady. I just sat there for a moment, shocked, and then I bolted out of the room, ran downstairs, and drank some orange juice, and when I came back, she was gone. Over the years, I have felt bad for running out of the room, since it seems like she genuinely wanted to help, and she didn't seem malevolent at all. She looked to be maybe in her late 30s or 40s. I never saw her again either. There were lots of little things, like stuff moving around and hearing it move at night. I would think it was my cats, but then I would find all of them asleep downstairs. Lights we thought we'd turned off when we left the house would be on once again when we returned, and doors would be opened that we thought we had closed. One cat that I truly considered mine and was close to had some strange occurrences around my parents. He would constantly try to get into my parents' bedroom, where one of our cats took up permanent residence the entirety of her life. All of our doors were round knobs, and my parents would lock their door at night. My dad has OCD and checks all of the doors and windows every night, so there's no way that a door isn't locked after he checks it. He'd often come back multiple times too, and find them unlocked again even when my mom and I were both out of town. Anyway, my dad would often wake up in the middle of the night to see the door open, and my cat standing there as though he'd opened the locked, round knob door handle. It happened more than once, too. I never figured that out. My cat would also turn on faucets and flush toilets randomly. He was really smart. My cat died earlier this year, at the old age of about 20. On the night he died, I was asleep and felt a cat jump into my bed. I'm now living in Southern California, no pets, just a girlfriend that lives with me, and immediately come and cuddle up familiarly next to me. I even felt the warmth and was very happy. After a bit, it faded away and I came to my senses. I called my dad and said, "He didn't die, Teddy." My dad said he had died, just a few hours earlier. It hasn't just been houses that I've had stuff happen in either. On 2 separate occasions in 2 different apartments in 2 different states, I've been asleep and had an experience that I can only describe as attempted demonic possession. I grew up in an overly religious family, Mormons to be specific, but was never welcomed there. And I was often bullied for being the weird kid, for, of all things, liking Star Wars and video games. Welcome to Farmtown, USA, I guess. Around age 14, though, I stopped going to church really and became a staunch atheist. Around age 19 after college, I was still living in southern Idaho in my own apartment. One night, I woke up sweating, unable to get my body to move, but with my limbs shaking and flailing rapidly, almost inhumanly. It was extremely dark, and I couldn't open my eyes, but a slight slit before they'd close really tightly again. While all of this was happening, all hope and happiness seemed to drain, and I felt like I just wanted to die. Even being an atheist, I started to pray like when I was a kid. Within moments of starting to pray, everything went back to normal, and I was able to open my eyes. I let out a gasp like I hadn't breathed for minutes, and was sweating profusely. I got up and watched funny Netflix shows for the rest of the night. I experienced the same thing, but even more forcefully again years later. But this time in Eugene, Oregon. Once again I started praying, and again it receded after a few minutes. It's been 5 years since then, and it was shortly after that my current girlfriend moved in with me. The last one I remember was at a work friend's house when I was 18. I gone over to fix her computer and was removing some viruses when I noticed that she was just standing at the door to her garage, staring intently at the door at the back of her garage. I asked her what she was looking at, and she told me that sometimes she gets weirded out by the door at the back of the garage. I went to look, and the moment I saw it, I felt like my spine had a current of electricity running down it. Having grown up with weird stuff in my house, I decided to investigate. The closer I got, the more intense the feeling. Standing in the frame of the door, it felt surreal, almost like I was standing in some sort of otherworldly portal. Then, the moment I stepped onto the other side of the door frame, everything returned to normal and felt boring. I looked back through at my friend watching me, feeling kind of bored, like nothing had really happened. The moment I stepped back through, though, the feeling of electricity flowing through me returned until I left the garage. These are all the experiences I can remember. I don't know if all of these houses are haunted, or my family's haunted, or I'm haunted. But what I do know, or at least what I think is interesting, is that everybody in my family built their own homes, yet they were all haunted. Maybe one of those things, or several of those things, followed me. I don't know. But these are my experiences. I'm a 28-year-old male who lives in British Columbia, Canada. This experience had happened when I was about 9 years old. During the time, we used to live by a heritage site which was called the Pilith House. You can Google it if you want some more background. My family and pretty much the entire neighborhood used to refer to this house as the Creepy Dollhouse every time we drove by or spoke of it. This experience had happened on a windy, somewhat rainy fall day. I was sick that day, so my mom made me stay home, and I didn't have to show up to school. At the time, it was only my mom and I at home. I had 2 older sisters that were in high school, and my dad was at work. My mom used to sew clothes for a living and worked from home a couple of days during the week. Right outside the rear sliding door that exits to the backyard, we built a small shed, like a room area, where my mom could sew and store her sewing machine and supplies. She would be in there a couple of hours a day and would check up on me when it was time for lunch and things like that. On this particular day, it was a normal sick day for me, just like every other sick day. I woke up, had some cereal, and turned on the TV to watch some Barney, while my mom was in the backyard sewing her clothes. The couch that I was on was facing the TV, so my head was turned to the left. In front of me was a black glass fireplace with a reflection where my 2 feet were facing. We also had a hallway that would lead up to the bedrooms where my head was pointing at. As I was watching Barney, I remember this pretty vividly, I noticed a dark figure with its knees bent, hunched over, and swaying side to side, with its arms bent out on the reflection of my fireplace. This figure continued its dancing for a couple of seconds, until I turned around to look down the hallway, and nothing was there. It was almost as if it was mimicking what Barney was doing on TV. I wasn't frightened because I thought it could have just been one of my siblings home for lunch or just screwing with me. I called out to my siblings by name, but nobody answered. I even ran down the hallway and checked out all the rooms, but again nobody was there. I ran out to get my mom and told her what happened, so we both came inside to look around, but the house was empty. But here's the strangest part. As we were coming out of the hallway, the front door slammed open, so I had to go downstairs and close and lock it. It was windy that day, but the door should have been locked. We didn't really think much of it, and just sort of brushed it off. Fast forward more than 10 years later. By this time, we had already moved out. My sister had come to visit me and my parents, and we were talking over lunch. My sister had recently learned that her friend's dad works for the government, and was assigned to take care of and maintain the Piliff House. She only brought this up because, again, the Piliff House used to be right beside us. This would require him to stay a night, so he could wake up and do yard work. Apparently, he has had some frequent experiences in that house, such as random footsteps, knocking, but mostly someone jumping on his bed while he was trying to sleep. He was never bothered by it because it was so frequent it just seemed normal. He mentioned that there was the spirit of a little boy and a man in that house. As she was telling us this, I immediately connected the dots. I'm pretty sure I met the little boy, and I'm pretty sure he just wanted to play. I've had some crazy things happen to me at my house. My neighborhood sits on top of a Native American burial ground. There are even some ruins and a burial mound in my friend's backyard, literally. Also, there was a Revolutionary War battle about a mile down the street. Fun stuff, right? Ever since I moved into that house with my parents about 13 years ago, I was 4. My little brother was around 1. Now I'm 17 and he's 14. A lot has happened. My brother, who was 6 at the time of the story, used to run around the house claiming to be chased by a monster. My mom and I were sitting on the couch one day and he was standing in front of the TV, but then he started shaking and ran to my mom and sat on her lap. He said that a lady tapped him on the shoulder and asked if she could speak with his father. You could bet my mom picked up both of us like footballs, got in the car as fast as possible, and went to my grandma's. For the longest time after that, though, things have been quiet. Something happened, it was very minor. Within the last 5 years, however, things have really kicked up again. For example, once I was standing in the kitchen at around age 13. I was staring out the window and I heard my name whispered in my ear really softly. I remember saying, "Yeah, Mom?" Only to look and see her fast asleep on the couch in the next room. Another time at around 3 in the afternoon, while I was home alone with my brother who was napping upstairs, I heard a knock on the door and a couple of kids giggle pretty loudly. I answered the door right away, too fast for them to have run off, but no one was there. My mom heard a loud crash once and the little kid giggle while in the living room. She ran into the kitchen to call my dad and tell him about it. While she was in the kitchen, the garbage can lid started swinging. My dad, who's never experienced anything paranormal until last month, was working in the garage. The cap that keeps the air inside of a bike was thrown at him from across the room. I don't know why all of a sudden these things just started happening, out of nowhere after all these years of silence. My mom runs around the house with holy water after every experience because she's scared that it's going to hurt someone. I kind of doubt that. It's never hurt anybody before. It's only given us inconveniences and scared us, but I guess anything's possible. Does anyone have any explanation?